On June 15, 2021, little Summer Wells vanished from her home in Hawkins County, Tennessee. More than a year later, her grandmother, Candus Harer, finally broke her silence. She gave an account of the day that seemed clear and orderly. A trip to the emergency room for knee pain, waiting for medication, returning home, resting in her camper, transplanting small cactus plants, and then the moment when Summer came inside with a peppermint candy, her favorite, before asking to go play with her brothers. According to Harer, that was the last time she saw her granddaughter. At first glance, this timeline sounds straightforward, almost too neat. But what caught public attention was not just the content, but how perfectly it matched her daughter Candus Bly's earlier story. Every detail, every sequence aligned without variation. Was this the mark of truth faithfully remembered, or of a narrative carefully maintained? Today we examine three key elements: the unusual consistency between testimonies, the gaps that remain unverified, and the impact of demeanor and history on public perception. When investigators and the public began piecing together the events of June 15, 2021, one of the most striking features was not just what was said, but how precisely it was repeated. Candus Harer, Summer's grandmother, eventually gave her account of the day. It sounded simple. She went to the emergency room to have her knee checked, received an injection, picked up medication, returned home, rested briefly in her camper, suggested transplanting small cactus plants, and then watched as Summer came inside, grabbed a peppermint candy, her favorite, and announced she wanted to go play with her brothers. That, Harer explained, was the last time she saw her granddaughter. At first glance, nothing in this timeline seems remarkable. Many families have ordinary routines that include errands, small household tasks, and children moving between indoors and outdoors. What caught the attention of observers, however, was how closely this timeline matched the one given earlier by Summer's mother, Candus Bly. The two accounts line up step by step. Both women describe the emergency room visit. Both describe waiting for the prescription. Both describe returning home. Both mention the cactus planting. Both remember Summer with the peppermint candy. Both recall Bly walking Summer back into the house and telling the boys to keep an eye on her. The overlap is not just in broad strokes. It extends into the fine details: the candy, the cactus, the sequence of events. Even the pacing of their retellings, the order in which each step is delivered, follows the same rhythm. For some, this is reassuring. Two independent witnesses remembering the same events in the same way could be evidence of accuracy. It could mean that this is exactly what happened, that the details were so distinct, they imprinted on both minds and remained unchanged. But for others, the sameness is unsettling. Human memory, especially over long spans of time, is rarely so precise. Psychologists have long studied how memory degrades and shifts. Over weeks and months, most people lose some detail. They may mix up the order of events, forget what happened just before or after a key moment, or recall small things only when prompted. If two people separately recall an experience months later, their stories usually overlap on the main facts, but diverge on the smaller ones. One might say they arrived home around noon, the other might think it was closer to 1 o'clock. One might remember a child eating a snack, the other might not. Those variations are natural markers of authentic memory. In this case, the absence of variation raises red flags for some observers. Instead of drifting apart, the two narratives remain locked together, as though frozen in time. Every retelling by both women returns to the same sequence, the same props, the same conclusions. There are no corrections, no hesitations, no moments of, "I think it was around then," or "I'm not sure if it happened before or after." Instead, the narrative is delivered smoothly, as if memorized. Critics suggest this could be the sign of a rehearsed story. If two people know they will be asked the same questions repeatedly, and they fear that small differences might be used against them, they may decide to coordinate. They may agree on what to include, what to leave out, and in what order the events should be told. Once such a script is set, the challenge becomes holding on to it, repeating it word for word, time after time, without letting natural differences creep in. The benefit is clear. If the stories remain identical, there are no contradictions for investigators to seize upon. But the risk is equally clear. When the match is too exact, it can itself appear suspicious. From the perspective of law enforcement, perfectly aligned stories can actually be less convincing than slightly mismatched ones. Detectives know that truthful witnesses rarely remember everything the same way. Small discrepancies can usually be explained by the limits of memory. But when two people repeat an account with precision, right down to unusual details, it may look like collaboration. Investigators often watch for identical phrasing or for retellings that remain unchanged over long periods of time. The more unusual the detail, such as transplanting cactus plants or a peppermint candy, the less likely it is that two independent witnesses would describe it the same way months later without any variation. There is also the issue of emotional texture. Genuine memories often contain hesitations, corrections, or tangents. Someone might start to describe the afternoon, then pause and say, "No, wait, maybe that was before we went outside." Or they might suddenly remember an extra detail. "Oh, and I think the dog was barking at the time." These natural imperfections give a story the ring of authenticity. In the accounts of Harer and Bly, those imperfections are largely absent. The story is told in a straight line, polished and tight, as though designed to withstand cross-examination. Why might two witnesses do this? One explanation is self-protection. Both women knew they would be under scrutiny, not only from law enforcement, but also from the public and the media. The Wells family was under a microscope from the moment Summer disappeared. Every interview, every live stream, every statement was dissected by online audiences. In such an environment, even an innocent mistake, a wrong time, a forgotten step, could be amplified into suspicion. Coordinating a unified story could feel like the safest way to survive that scrutiny. Another explanation is image management. The Wells family faced constant criticism in the court of public opinion. By telling the same story, without deviation, Harer and Bly may have believed they were shielding themselves from being portrayed negatively. The more consistent they appeared, the harder it would be for critics to accuse them of lying. In a way, consistency became a strategy to control perception. Yet this strategy carries risks. A story that never changes can start to look less like memory and more like a script. Online commentators quickly noticed the identical details and began suggesting the two women had learned their lines. Behavioral analysts pointed out the absence of natural variation as a possible sign of rehearsal. In trying to protect themselves, Harer and Bly may have inadvertently fueled more suspicion. Of course, it is also possible that both women are telling the truth exactly as it happened. The peppermint candy and the cactus planting may simply have been memorable enough to stick firmly in their minds. The fact that their stories have not changed could reflect accuracy rather than deception. Investigators must weigh this possibility carefully. Dismissing consistency as evidence of collusion can be just as dangerous as ignoring inconsistencies. The challenge lies in distinguishing between natural alignment and rehearsed alignment. One way professionals approach this is through linguistic analysis. They study the specific words used by each witness. Do they use the same phrasing, or do they describe the same events in slightly different words? Identical phrasing can suggest rehearsal. Independent wording with the same meaning can suggest genuine memory. In the case of Harer and Bly, observers noted not just shared details, but similar language, another factor that fed the perception of a coordinated narrative. In the end, the question is not whether the timeline is possible. It clearly is. But whether its delivery feels natural. To many in the public, the polished nature of the retellings made them uneasy. It is the very perfection of the story that invites doubt. The broader lesson is that in high-stakes cases, how a story is told can matter as much as what the story contains. A witness who appears too smooth may be distrusted, even if telling the truth. A witness who appears inconsistent may raise red flags, even if their memory is simply imperfect. For Harer and Bly, the choice to present a unified, flawless account may have been intended to strengthen their credibility. Instead, it has become one of the most debated aspects of the Summer Wells case. When looking at the disappearance of Summer Wells, the details of June 15th do not end with what was included in Candus Harer's account. Just as significant are the moments that were not included, or at least not verified. In any investigation, especially one as high profile as this, unverified stretches of time become critical. They represent opportunities for alternative explanations, potential turning points, or hidden details that might reshape the narrative. Candus Harer explained that she went to the emergency room for knee pain, that she was given an injection, and that she picked up medication before returning home. But so far, no public confirmation has been shared that ties her medical visit to that exact day and time. There is no hospital documentation in the public record, no receipts or time-stamped paperwork released, and no clear third-party witness confirming her presence. Law enforcement may very well have these documents privately, but in the court of public opinion, their absence fuels speculation. Without independent evidence, what should be an ordinary errand becomes a question mark. The same is true for the alleged stop at the horse stables. Harer mentioned it almost in passing, as though it were a minor part of the day, not central to the story. But again, there has been no confirmation that this stop actually occurred. No one has stepped forward publicly to say they saw them there, and no camera footage has surfaced. For a family under such scrutiny, even small errands like this take on outsized significance. Each unverified step is treated not as routine, but as potential evidence. The timeline continues with Harer returning home and resting in her camper. She describes lying down for a short time, then sitting in the doorway before suggesting that the cactus plants be transplanted into larger pots. These details sound ordinary enough, but once more, they lack external verification. No one outside the family saw her in the camper. No independent person observed the gardening. These are self-reported moments. Why do these blank spaces matter so much? Because in missing person cases, the difference between an ordinary day and a life-changing event often lies in the margins. What happened in the minutes between leaving the hospital and arriving home? Was there a stop that was not mentioned? Did they interact with someone who has not been acknowledged? Could there have been a delay or an unexpected problem? Each unverified interval is a container in which almost anything could have occurred. And because the disappearance of Summer Wells is such a mystery, these containers draw the eye of both investigators and the public. Consider the medical detail. Harer says she received an injection for knee pain. In many cases, injections for joint pain can cause temporary discomfort, soreness, or fatigue. Doctors often recommend rest afterward. Yet in her story, after this medical procedure, she was back home transplanting cactus plants, an activity that, while not physically extreme, still requires bending, lifting, and balancing. Some observers question whether this activity fits the timeline so soon after treatment. Others argue that everyone's recovery is different and that the action is not impossible. But the point is not whether it was physically possible. The point is that without verification, it raises questions. Another element is the way Harer tells her story. She moves from one event to the next without filling in every transition. She does not explain exactly how long she rested or whether anything happened during that time. She does not account for the precise minutes between arriving home and seeing Summer with the peppermint candy. This may seem like a normal omission. After all, most people do not remember every single moment of an ordinary day. But in the context of an investigation, what is left out becomes as meaningful as what is included. Behavioral experts often note that when a witness skips over sections of time repeatedly and in every retelling, it may signal that the omission is deliberate rather than accidental. If the gaps were random, one might expect that over time new details would emerge. A memory of a sound, a visitor, a short errand. But when the gaps remain consistent and untouched across multiple accounts, it suggests boundaries, a choice to leave certain intervals unaddressed. Why would someone omit information? There are many possibilities, not all sinister. A person might believe the detail is irrelevant. For example, maybe there was a short personal errand, or a conversation that seemed unrelated to Summer's disappearance. Sharing it could feel unnecessary. Others might omit information out of embarrassment or privacy, not wanting unrelated aspects of their life to be pulled into the public spotlight. In some cases, omissions are protective, shielding another individual, avoiding uncomfortable questions, or steering clear of subjects that could be misinterpreted. But omissions can also conceal events that are more consequential. A chance encounter, an unexpected argument, an accident, or an error in judgment. Any of these could become critical to understanding what really happened. In that sense, the unverified gaps in Harer's account are like locked doors. We do not know what, if anything, lies behind them. The importance of these gaps is magnified by how carefully the rest of the story is told. The polished, rehearsed nature of the timeline draws even more attention to the parts that are missing. When most of a story is neat and complete, the missing pieces look larger by contrast. It is as if the blank spaces glow brighter simply because everything else is drawn in such fine lines. Investigators understand this dynamic well. They know that in many cases, the breakthrough comes not from the events that are described, but from the ones that are glossed over. They study who is present in each part of the timeline, what can be independently confirmed, and what remains solely dependent on the word of one person. In Harer's account, the ER visit, the medication pickup, the stop at the stables, the rest in the camper, and the gardening all fall into the category of unverified or partially verified events. It is important to stress that unverified does not mean untrue. Lack of confirmation does not equal falsehood. But in the eyes of investigators, each unverified event becomes a question to be tested. Did it happen when and how the witness says it did? Can it be corroborated? Can a receipt, a video, or another witness support it? If not, why not? For the public, the absence of verification fuels endless speculation. Online communities have debated these gaps for years, proposing theories about what could have happened in the missing stretches of time. Some suggest accidental harm, others suspect an outside encounter. Still others think the gaps conceal nothing more than ordinary, forgettable moments. In the absence of proof, imagination fills the void. This is the challenge of the unverified gaps in the Summer Wells case. They may be nothing, or they may be everything. They may represent the ordinary rhythms of a day overshadowed by tragedy, or they may conceal the crucial minutes in which tragedy itself took place. Until investigators can confirm or rule out these intervals, the speculation will continue. In the end, what stands out most is not just what Candus Harer remembers, but what she does not, or chooses not, to say. The peppermint candy, the cactus plants, the trip to the ER, these are firm, repeated, and precise. The spaces in between remain vague, and in a case where every minute matters, vagueness becomes more than a quirk of memory. It becomes the very thing investigators and the public want most to understand. When a child goes missing, the behavior of those closest to the case is often scrutinized just as closely as the evidence itself. For Summer Wells, much of that scrutiny has fallen on her grandmother, Candus Harer. What she said in interviews, how she said it, and how she interacted, or didn't interact, with investigators has become as much a topic of debate as the events of June 15, 2021. One of the most discussed issues is Harer's level of cooperation with law enforcement. Hawkins County Sheriff Ronnie Lawson has publicly stated that the Wells family hired an attorney and has not been as cooperative as many would hope. In law enforcement language, not cooperative does not necessarily mean refusal to answer questions. It often means the family is no longer providing voluntary updates, extra interviews, or unsolicited information. From Lawson's perspective, cooperation is measured in terms of ongoing, proactive engagement. Harer, however, sees things differently. In her interview, she insisted that she is not uncooperative. She explained that she is willing to speak with investigators if they contact her. She has not shut the door to questions, but she has not taken the initiative to call and check in, to provide new information, or to push for progress. To her, cooperation means being available when asked. To law enforcement, cooperation means being proactive. This gap in definitions may seem small, but it has enormous consequences in the court of public opinion. Families who call investigators repeatedly, who chase down leads, who appear visibly desperate for answers, are often praised as engaged and sincere. Families who wait for investigators to come to them risk being seen as passive, detached, or even evasive. In the absence of hard evidence, perception takes on a life of its own. The contrast is especially stark when one considers Harer's willingness to call law enforcement for other matters. When YouTubers or self-styled investigators came onto the Wells property, she and others in the family quickly contacted authorities to report trespassing. In disputes with Don Wells, calls were made as well. These moments show that Harer is not opposed to picking up the phone when her own immediate concerns are at stake. But when it comes to the larger investigation into her granddaughter's disappearance, she has waited for law enforcement to reach out first. To many observers, this selective engagement raises questions about priorities. Another major factor shaping perception is Harer's demeanor during her public interview. Many viewers described her tone as cool, flat, and controlled. She showed little visible emotion. There were no voice breaks, no signs of grief spilling over, no dramatic expressions of urgency. Instead, she spoke in an even, measured way, repeating the timeline without expanding on it. For some, this was simply her personality, a calm, restrained way of handling stress. For others, it was a red flag. The absence of expressive emotion is often misinterpreted in the public eye. People expect family members of missing children to cry, to plead, to display raw anguish. When those expectations are not met, suspicion can take root. Yet behavioral experts caution that trauma manifests differently for different people. Some react with tears, others with shock, numbness, or detachment. The problem is that the public rarely makes such allowances. In the world of online forums and YouTube commentary, a lack of visible grief is often equated with guilt or indifference, even though it may simply be a coping mechanism. Harer's interview also came at a very particular time, after Don Wells, Summer's father, was incarcerated on unrelated charges. With Don absent, Harer may have felt a new responsibility to speak for the family. She may have believed it was safer to speak when her account would not conflict with Don's, or she may have wanted to shape the narrative in his absence. The timing fueled speculation that the decision to go public was calculated rather than spontaneous. Beyond demeanor and cooperation, Harer's past has also colored public perception. Records from different states point to previous legal issues, including allegations of child endangerment and a domestic violence charge in Wisconsin. Some of these records are sealed, meaning the full details are not available. Harer has also used multiple aliases over the years: Candus Bly, Candus Harper, Candus Harer, and even the unusual name Celeste Slobs. While name changes can happen for many ordinary reasons, such as marriage or relocation, in the eyes of the public, they often spark suspicion. When you combine these elements, prior allegations, sealed records, and multiple names, the result is a portrait that invites doubt. It does not prove wrongdoing in Summer's case, but it creates an atmosphere of mistrust. For investigators, this history may prompt them to weigh Harer's statements more cautiously, to seek corroboration for her account rather than taking it at face value. For the public, it feeds into a narrative of mystery and hidden truths. What magnifies all of this further is the family's history of tragedy. More than a decade before Summer disappeared, Harer's other daughter, Rosemary Bly, vanished in Wisconsin. Rosemary was last seen driving away from her home, and her car was later found abandoned. To this day, she has never been found. 2 unresolved disappearances in one immediate family is extraordinarily rare. While coincidence is possible, the statistical improbability ensures that both cases are mentioned together again and again. For some, this history makes Harer a figure of deep sympathy, a mother who lost one daughter and a grandmother who lost a granddaughter. For others, it is simply too unusual to ignore. They question whether there could be a link, whether environmental or relational factors played a role, or whether the family history suggests patterns worth examining. Law enforcement has not publicly stated that the 2 cases are connected, but in the world of true crime commentary, the connection is discussed constantly. The dual disappearances put Harer in a unique and difficult position. She is both a potential source of information and a recurring figure in 2 separate mysteries. Every word she speaks about Summer is filtered through the memory of Rosemary's unresolved case. For those who already distrust her, this background reinforces suspicion. For those who sympathize with her, it highlights the weight of trauma she has endured. In the larger picture, Harer's case shows how much perception shapes reality in investigations like this. Her flat tone, her reactive approach to investigators, her complicated history, all of these have become part of the story, whether or not they are relevant to the disappearance itself. In the eyes of the public, image and behavior often carry as much weight as evidence. This is the paradox at the heart of the Summer Wells case. On one hand, Candus Harer has told her story with clarity and consistency. On the other, her consistency appears rehearsed, her omissions appear deliberate, and her demeanor appears detached. These impressions may or may not reflect the truth, but they are powerful enough to influence how both investigators and the public interpret her role. Ultimately, the combination of cooperation gaps, controlled presentation, and complicated history ensures that Harer remains a focal point of debate. Is she a grandmother unfairly judged by her tone and past, or is she a key figure whose carefully chosen words conceal more than they reveal? Until conclusive evidence is found, that question will remain unresolved. What is certain is that in cases like this, how a witness chooses to engage, proactively or reactively, emotionally or cautiously, can shape the entire narrative, for better or for worse.